and then it's ready to go.
Works. We good? You guys all good?
Yep.
All right. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Sorry we're so late. Holy cow. Good evening. Welcome to the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education regular meeting for October 23rd, 2018. Leanne will act as our Secretary Pro Tem this evening, so if you could take the roll.
Excuse me, Susan Ryder.
Present.
Philip Hood, absent. Mark Berry.
Present.
Leanne Charlotte, present. Julie Getchell, absent. Richard Haig.
Present.
John Rosen, absent.
All right, so we have a quorum of 4, so we're going to begin. And if you guys will stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And now we offer the opportunity for public comment. If anybody would like to address the board, please step to the podium and do so. No.
Royce Lee is not here.
Okay.
So when you're ready for that, I can give a brief introduction.
All right. Now we offer the opportunity in item 5 for the addition of, for the board members to enter into, provide an option. Having trouble saying this out loud. Every meeting, we offer the board members an opportunity to suggest an agenda item for a future meeting, if you think there's something important that we need to be talking about, or if there's something we need to address specifically tonight. So if there's anything you want, or if you want to send me an email and let us know for the future, you can do it that way. Not hearing anything. We now have an item that was supposed to be addressed by our regional superintendent, Royce Lee Wood, but she's not here, so Jean's going to say something?
I just was going to mention both elementary and middle schools won attendance awards for the county. And the Honorable Royce Lee Wood was going to be here at our meeting, and she's out ill today, and so she will not be coming. But that is a huge honor.
Okay. Any questions on that? We're going to move right to our reports, and I believe this is going to be a tag team report?
Yes.
Between our elementary and middle school principals?
If we could have Margaret and Nate come up, I'm going to prep all of you for this. It has come up with the policy committee to review our policy on cell phone use, and it's been a while since we've had a report out on that. I've asked Margaret and Nate to talk about cell phone use in their buildings. They will be very, very brief reports. If there is an interest in changing anything, this would be the night that you could talk to us. We will definitely have to do some research and talk through things. So tonight is just stage 1, and if we need further stages, we'd be happy to bring back more info. So Margaret.
Well, the report for LBES is relatively brief. Our students, we do have a lot of students who do have cell phones in their backpacks, but it's really a non-issue at our school. They stay in the backpacks, they stay turned off. We really don't have any times where teachers have to interact with students about having them out in class. I haven't even ever collected a cell phone in the office or anything like that, so it is quite different than what you would find in a middle school. We also do talk with parents, like when the students are going to Atwood, that we don't bring cell phones to Atwood. They're welcome to bring cameras, but they don't bring cell phones. And the way that we communicate with parents on that trip is that the teachers are emailing photos and sending emails and texts. I would say the only other time when cell phones would become something that we're having conversations with students about are on the school bus, and either using them or using them appropriately on the school bus. So at LBES, it's a pretty simple conversation.
So obviously there are more middle school students that have cell phones, though not all of them do. The policy is the same. However, students are expected to put their phone, will turn their phone off and put it in their locker during the school day. When students kind of fail to comply with that, if they're caught with the phone, if it falls out of their pocket, or a parent sees it, or a teacher sees it, or they take it out for some reason, generally speaking, that cell phone is confiscated, brought to my office. If it's a first-time occurrence, I have a conversation with them, remind them of the policy, return the phone. If it's an ongoing issue, I'll follow up with parents and offer up some suggestions and some ideas. Sometimes there are students who will just bring it to me, turn it off, and put it on a table in my office, leave it there during the school day, and pick it up at the end of the day if it's something that a parent feels strongly that they have, but it sometimes is an option that a parent and a student might select. The only really exception to the field trip piece, the last 3 years we've allowed students to bring cell phones with them on the Washington, D.C. trip. Students understand that that cell phone is to be used for emergency purposes only, or if it's their music player on the plane, they'll be allowed to use it that way, or use it to play games on the plane. But once we get to DC, it's expected to be off and away unless they're going to take a picture with it. We do ask the students to turn the phones off, and we collect them in the evening so as not to leave them with their phones overnight in the hotel rooms. We return the phones to them the next day. We let the students know that charging those phones is their responsibility, and generally that's worked well. One of the things that we did do was to kind of talk a little bit about the pros and cons as we see them as administrators to phones being accessible to kids during the school day. Jean, would you like me to go through that list that we shared at admin team? Or?
Let's see if they have any questions, because
Okay.
then we have answers.
Absolutely.
I have questions.
Okay.
So my read of the policy is that cell phones should be turned off and put away.
Yes, during the school day.
And my understanding is if a kid has a cell phone, put away, but in a pocket where it can be seen, it gets taken away. Is that accurate?
I guess if a teacher sees the cell phone, there are some, I think, clothing, in the pocket where they can see,
Yeah.
is that a cell phone in your pocket? Yes, it is. Okay, do you understand it's supposed to be turned off and put away? Yeah.
Which is a little different than what the policy says. Would you agree?
It is a little different because it's a lot more, we're relaxed a little bit on it,
Yeah.
so.
No, what I'm saying is what we're doing is more restrictive than what the policy says.
All right, so explain that piece, because I'm.
The policy
thinking
says the
otherwise.
phone should be turned off.
And put it in their locker. That's where it's supposed.
I don't think the policy actually says locker. What I'm questioning is, kids having a cell phone in their pocket that they're not using, it's not going off, or, it's not making noise or whatever, it's just there.
Okay.
Which to me seems reasonable.
Okay.
And when you think about some of the emergencies or things that can come up, I think it makes sense for a kid to be able to have a cell phone they can get to,
Okay.
as long as they're not abusing that privilege.
Okay. So one of the things that we did talk about in relation to that emergency piece, and I think that's not an uncommon suggestion for a parent to make, is both a pro and a con, right? A parent may be feeling comfortable knowing that their child has that phone. The con being, if I'm the teacher responsible for those kids in that moment of crisis, I need them to be paying attention to me. I need them to follow my directions. When that phone comes out and they're frantically texting mom and dad, they're less likely to hear my instructions. They're less likely to follow my directive to move to this part of the room, or to move out of that space, or to close that door and lock that door. I think that concern from our end is that that phone becomes a distraction in the event of an emergency when I need them to follow my directions.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could look at both sides of that, because I think we could all also agree that we've certainly watched the news and seen kids leaving schools at a point where there isn't a teacher standing next to them providing that care, so a kid might be in a position where they'd need to have a phone.
Are there non-emergency examples of that fall into your concern? Like, think they should be entitled to it for, are there arguments other than emergency situations?
I think there are a lot of reasonable uses that a kid would have for a cell phone. And if they're not using it in a way that's disruptive to the school, it doesn't seem to me that the school should control, like, for example, that they have it in their pocket. That seems
Yeah.
to me overly restrictive, if a student isn't having a problem with that.
And so I don't want to stand here and say that there aren't some valid reasons where you might suggest that having a phone
Right.
is, and maybe I could go through some of those, because I think it is important to point out. Some of the things we mentioned was that obviously parents may take comfort in knowing that they can reach their student with a text or a phone call during the school day. Students have a fast and easy access to a camera, which they may be able to apply to a school assignment that they're working on. It can be an effective learning tool, without a doubt. Improved access to student apps like TeamSnap, Remind, Seesaw. Those are things that students could benefit from using. Could be used in case of emergency. Less time and effort enforcing the cell phone policy. I'll be honest, that's something that I spend time doing. And maybe I could regain some time if I weren't. Perhaps less need to rely on transport. We take messages for kids. It's not uncommon for a parent to call and say, hey, can you let my son know that I'm going to be picking him up after school? And so that message needs to be relayed through the office to the teacher at the end of the day. Some of the cons that we have experienced, either because students have them with them, they'll forget to turn them off. They'll forget to turn off the ringer. That phone goes off and it disrupts class. That happens frequently. It can be a distraction to students, we know that. One of the challenges that we do face, we have kids who will text mom and dad and let them know they're not feeling well, or they'd like them to come and pick them up, and they may have never even come to the office to let us know that. They haven't been given, the nurse hasn't been given the opportunity to take a look at them and address whatever they might be experiencing. We'll just have a parent show up at the door, my son's sick, I'm here to get him. We didn't even know. So that's one of those things that does occur. Academic dishonesty. Certainly having a phone that isn't accessing our firewall or going through our network is unrestricted in terms of what they might be able to look up and apply to schoolwork or something along those lines. Right. I think one of the big concerns, of course, is that unsupervised time in a locker room, in a bathroom, what they might be photographing, how they might choose to then potentially publish or post that information. There's social implications as well that we are concerned about. Not all students have phones. Certainly there are kids who are fighting tooth and nail at home with parents. I'm one of them who is trying to deal with that idea of, like, maybe a parent not comfortable wanting their student to have a phone, but feeling pressure to do so because others are allowed to use it or even encouraged to use it in class. The piece that we talked about, right, on the one hand, giving them access to a phone in the event of emergency, you could certainly argue and see the benefits of that. And then there may be some drawbacks as well. I can cite an example, if you'd like, which is the bus situation that we dealt with last year. I had parents who were responding to their kids and making it even, moving toward a car. This was a car that had rear-ended a bus, a very minor accident. So most of the students didn't even realize that had happened. Those that did sent a text message or a call to mom and dad. They were already there on the scene, wanting to board the bus, making it difficult for me to get to the bus to do what I needed to do in that event. Those are the small examples of situations where it can impede our work in terms of what we need to do to support kids.
And law enforcement, when we meet with them to go through our safety plans, they'll talk to us about kids having cell phones and how that interrupts what they're doing for us also. I will share, though, it is a policy decision, and I think, if you propose we can bring it to policy and talk about it, we can talk about it here. I think the one thing, Nate, for application, because I wasn't in on it, but there was some discussion for the earthquake, was it earthquake drill, or what drill was that we all...
I was hoping to come to you with some really awesome data. Mm-hmm. I was really excited. On October 3rd, there was the national crisis drill, where you may have had that alert come to your phone, and it was just a test of the entire system. The expectation was nationwide, all phones were going to go off. And we were told that regardless of their silence setting, they would make a noise. We found out that wasn't the case. If the phone was turned to silent or to vibrate, it would get the notification, but it wouldn't make an audible alert. On that day, there was one student phone that went off.
Out of the whole school?
Out of the whole school. So what I hoped to be able to do is to share with you some statistics on how many students are actually carrying the phones with them. That didn't present itself as an opportunity as I'd hoped that it would. But I can tell you that I probably end up with 2 phones a week with students that have, generally speaking, the phones are taken away when a student has taken it out and is using it, or it goes off in class and causes a disruption.
One point that I would add is that we do put a lot of time and effort into screening what websites students are accessing through their Chromebooks. And our internet filter works both at home and at school on those devices with their student accounts. But with a cell phone, if you're going with a cellular signal, we wouldn't be able to have any control over what students are using their phones for at school, or any reports or anything to track that information. So that is another concern, because even at the elementary school, we are keeping track and keeping an eye and following up with students who are not using their devices appropriately. So I would say that was, at administrative team, another real concern, that then it's sort of, they're using our network at our district, yet we can't track or determine what they're visiting.
And I think from the policy perspective, if in fact they do use their phone during the school day for some sort of larger discipline issue, I don't know, posting something inappropriate, taking a picture of someone and posting it during the school day, then we do have a new challenge as far as how we address that with students with a personal device that's not school issued.
That actually, and that can be a problem. In 2 districts ago, I had a student take a picture of a sub's rear end and posted it on Facebook, and with all kinds of terrible comments about the sub, and we didn't find out about it till the parents called and said, hey, are you guys aware of this? And so those are problems that can be created. But the last time we as a board have really reviewed this was before I even got here. So I think it's important to know what we're doing and see if there's an interest in bringing it back to policy for further discussion.
Not to add
I'd
more
like
to
to see it go back to the policy committee. There are a couple of aspects of this that I think we could touch on that would not be appropriate to talk about in the open meeting, just because they pertain to the way that we maintain security at the school.
Okay?
And that
makes
would-
sense.
Yeah.
So we'll bring it back, and the 2 of you would also be invited to attend that meeting to
Might
discuss.
I make one more suggestion? It may not just be a cell phone conversation. Obviously, the wearable devices are changing, and that's also something new that maybe needs to be discussed. I don't know.
So maybe we call it devices instead of cell phones,
Right, right.
because of all the Apple Watches and everything else.
And there's varying degrees of functionality, right? Some function just as a phone would, and others need a phone to do what it does. So.
So we will be scheduling a policy meeting, because 2 of our 3 policy members think they may be retiring from the board in the spring. So we'll have to have that meeting within the next probably 2 months, and I'll make sure that you guys attend that, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
All right, we're now going to our PTO report, and Ann Hill, President of the PTO.
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to let you know what the PTO is up to this year. I haven't checked in since last spring, so. We have so far at the elementary school bought new office chairs for the new reception area, new lobby. We have, or we're working on indoor recess, educational games, and toys. The student council at the elementary school actually put together a whole list of things that they thought would be wonderful for indoor recess, and Margaret shared that with us, and so we're going to go ahead and do that, which should make indoor recess a lot more enjoyable. And we are also going to be funding the 4th and 5th grade reading program, the Read With Me program that they've been doing. This year, we also brought back the 2nd grade Time Traveler program, which is a field trip that the 2nd graders took to downtown Lake Bluff and learned all about what Lake Bluff was like in 1890. So that was pretty cool. Moving forward at the elementary school, we're talking about next year pitching in on the playground renovation for the front playground. They're going to work on making it ADA accessible. Is that right? So the PTO would like to be involved in that as well, and we're chatting with Jay about budget and whatnot. At the middle school, we have continued to add on to the STEAM lab, so we bought iPads, which can be used as mobile workstations. So now kids don't have to stay right in their workstation, and they can move around and do more with the STEAM lab. And we bought a Carvey workstation, which is, it's basically, Nate, help me here if I'm wrong, like the reverse of a printer. So instead of printing like something in 3D, it takes what it is and carves it out. Is that right?
I've never even heard of that.
Pumpkin chase, you'll actually get to take home a trophy done on the carpet.
Very cool. Yeah, Pumpkin Fest and Pumpkin Chases this weekend, by the way, so that's our biggest fall fundraiser. Also for the STEAM Lab, we bought some robot kits that kids get to use, and a new drone at the end of last year with a camera. So lots of additions to the STEAM Lab, which seems to be going great, and lots of kids are taking advantage of that. Moving forward, at the middle school, we've been asked to help fund grade-specific libraries for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So we are going to work on that, and happy to grant that request and work out the details. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for all you do, Ann. I will share that the National Weather Service is saying it's going to be a very light winter, so I would predict those indoor recess games probably may not be used as much as we think. So that would be a good thing. I would also share that, once again, to the board, I have donated superintendent for the day, but this year I put grade levels on it. I think I said 3rd or 4th grade through 8th grade, and then lunch out for an elementary student. So I'm excited about that. But we really do, we thank you for all you do. You really contribute well, and it's great to meet with our parents and hear all the work that they're doing, so thank you.
It's a very busy job, thanks. I got a comment that is not related to PTO, but made me think of it on the STEAM Lab, and maybe this should have gone under addition of a discussion item or something like that. That seems to me that it would be a wonderful thing to promote more of in our community, and how that's used and all the cool stuff we do in our schools. Like a promotional video or a community demonstration, or some way to make people aware of just how cool it is to be at Lake Bluff Middle School because of all that stuff that they've donated and provided. I don't know how they make that happen, but it's just something to think about.
Sounds like Nate and Kelly will be busy working with that.
I think
we'll talk about it.
Realtors would love that in the town, when they're showing off our schools and,
Video.
We have some aspiring filmmakers who might be able to help us.
just a thought. Always good to market and do a little self-promotion. All right, so Jay is going to bring an update to us from the business department.
Pretty short. I just wanted to let you know we had the audit presentation scheduled for today, but there was an issue with the way that the teachers' retirement system, there was an issue with their financial report on how they were valuing a liability, and that's pushed our audit results back because we can't publish our auditor can't give an opinion on our financials without that liability. So,
which is true of all the districts,
which is true of all the
right?
districts. It's holding it up for all of the districts. So everything's kind of on hold, waiting for that new report.
So instead of, when do we normally do it?
It's normally due October 15th, so we would have done it at this meeting, and then we've filed for an extension into November. And right now it's on the calendar for, I think, the 13th of November.
Okay.
But we don't know when it will be resolved, so.
We're hoping to have it November 3rd.
But we won't get penalized.
No,
No.
it's impacting every district because it's a teacher's retirement system report.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Rubenstein?
Kevin
Not
doesn't.
tonight? Okay.
It goes to you now.
It goes to me, all right. The only thing I was going to raise is something I've brought up the past 2 or 3 meetings in a row. On November 1st, it's a Thursday evening at 6:30. We are doing a co-presentation with Vote Lake Bluff, the local caucus, trying to encourage individuals who might be interested in running for school board, as there will be 3 vacant seats up for election at the end of the year. And we will have a kind of a relaxed roundtable discussion to help people who might be interested understand what they might be getting themselves into. And the work involved and just how rewarding it is. So that is November 1st, 6:30 at the district offices, Vote Lake Bluff, and myself and a representative from Sally Davis from District 115 from the high school will be there because the Vote Lake Bluff is also supporting at least one person for the high school board. I'm not sure exactly the number there, but just to give our perspective, as well as Dr. Sophie will be there, and one representative from the Illinois Association of School Boards. So, sales pitch concluded. So that's that. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to say, support Pumpkin Fest. It's a big weekend that weekend, and on this weekend is also the Ghost Walk, and I've been asked to play a role, so I will be playing a role on Sunday this year.
Oh.
It's a big stretch. I can't tell you what the role is, but I do have a role. So I would encourage everyone to come out.
All right. Item 8A, our levy discussion. Mr. Khan is going to lead us in that.
Jay is going to be presenting the usual levy presentation, so he may be spending a little bit less time on some of the slides since you're an experienced board, but I want to note for when this is published that our presentations always go right on our webpage, and that Jay, as usual, is always available to talk through any questions, so.
Okay, so as Jean said, this is the first time we're presenting the 2008 tax levy recommendation. I'm going to go kind of fast through the presentation, but this is the whole presentation that I typically do the first time around. This will be posted on our website. We're required to pass an estimate or a tentative levy 20 days prior to the final levy, so we'll be bringing it back in November for approval. And on December 11th, we'll have the Truth in Taxation hearing, which is a public hearing to go over the levy and allow people to comment on it. And it's not required by law at the levy that we're asking for, but we do it every year because it's best practice and it's good for transparency for the community. So, just briefly go over the budget for this year, talk over some terms and the timeline for the levy, go through the calculation, talk a little bit about our 5-year projections so you can see how that all fits together, and then go through the recommendation. We have a planned deficit in our budget this year, largely due to the large capital expenditure for the air conditioning that we're all familiar with. We have a surplus in the operating funds, and we built up a big surplus in the O&M for the year and then transferred it to capital projects and used that for the air conditioning. But we do have a net $830,000 deficit this year. Just a reminder of where our revenue comes from. We're largely from property taxes is our primary source of revenue, with state, local, and other funding filling up the difference. The levy, just by definition, it's the amount requested by a governmental entity to be raised from property taxes. The tax extension is the amount that's actually billed, and usually the extension is less than the amount levied. There are 231 taxing districts in Lake County alone, including schools, municipalities, libraries, et cetera, and Lake Bluff School District accounts for 40% of the tax bill. It's based on the equalized assessed value. You'll see that term later on in the presentation. That's essentially the property value. The assessed value, or the equalized assessed value, is the properties assessed at 1/3 of the market value. That's the assessed part. And then it's equalized by both the township and county and state. So the county looks at all, it's assessed by the township assessors in all the different townships. And the county looks at all that to make sure that each township assessor is fairly valuing property. And then the state looks over the different counties and makes sure that each county is fairly assessing. And they would apply equalization factors to make up for any regional differences. And then this number is also after exemption. So this is taxable EAV we're concerned with after your homeowner's exemption, your senior exemption, things like that. CPI is a measure of inflation that's used in the calculation. And then the tax cap, we talk about a tax cap. Our taxes are capped by the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, or PTEL. What this does is it doesn't cap taxes, it limits the annual increase. This was put into law at a time when property values were rapidly increasing, and as a result, tax revenue was rapidly increasing, and this was an attempt to limit that. And it essentially allows districts to increase their taxes by CPI to adjust for inflation, and then allows districts to also tax new property, and with the assumption that much new property brings with it new students and new expenses. A new property is just defined as property that wasn't previously taxed. Looking at the tax cycle, it's all based.
Talk about what CPI is eventually, right? Yeah, but you're going to, the specifics.
Oh, yeah,
Right on here.
it's actually, the CPI word that we're using for this year is 2.1%, and it's the change in the consumer price index from the prior year. This is the equalized assessed value as of January 1st, and it's based on the prior 3 years of sales data. What's not on this slide is that we are also required to file a budget and appropriation ordinance on October 1st, which we did. We passed our budget. Our tax levy is due at the county by the last Tuesday in December, and we're required to certify a estimate 20 days prior to that. They will establish the final tax rates in April, and we have until that time to make any changes to our debt extension. And then the taxes are collected in June and September of 2019, and they become revenue for the 19-20 fiscal year. So we are back over here, and it's based on the property value from the previous January, and the money is collected and used in the next school year. So it's kind of a long timeline. If you look at the taxes, it's really, we all send one tax bill, but the taxes are in two big components. There's the taxes used to make our annual debt payment, and then our taxes used for operation. The taxes used for debt are not included in the PTEL formula, and they're not part of the levy. So we include it just for an overall picture, but they're not part of the levy request. When they issued the debt, the debt payments schedule was already established and approved by the voters, and so the county automatically extends those every year. If you look at our debt service for the future, it's pretty stable. It increases by about 1% a year out to 2027. And then the balance of the taxes and the majority of the taxes are for operations. These funds are limited by the tax cap formula, and this is what we're talking about today in terms of the levy request. If you look at who pays the taxes, if you think about our total tax ask, we're going to ask for a big pot of money, and that money is allocated based on property value, equalized assessed value. If you think of that as a pie, every property represents a tiny slice of that pie and pays that portion of the total tax burden for the district. You can say most of Lake Bluff is residential. The way we calculate the taxes, as I said, we take what we extended from the prior year, we grow it by CPI. I don't know why this isn't working. I went forward. Now it's going. Okay, we take what we extended the prior year, we grow it by CPI to get the total that we're going to levy for this year, and then we add new property to that, and that's how we get our current extension. I think it's just slow. So the total taxes on existing property go up by no more than CPI. The way we distribute those taxes to all the different properties is based by tax rate. The tax rate is just the total amount of money we request divided by the total value of property, and that gives you a rate, and then that rate is charged to each property based on its value. So as the amount of property value goes up, the tax rate goes down. So property assessment can really be the biggest driver in how much your taxes go up or down. If all the slices stayed the same fraction of the pie, then everybody's taxes would increase by no more than CPI. And so what really drives your taxes, if your taxes go up by more than CPI, then your property value changed more than everyone else's changed. It either went up more than the value than the average that everyone else's went up, or went down less than the value that everyone else's went down. Or in some cases, maybe a large, like a commercial or industrial property, which pays a large share of the taxes, leaves the district, and then the rest of the taxes get distributed amongst the existing property. For new property, we take the tax rate and we multiply it by the EAV of the new property. And because we don't know these amounts before we do the levy, we tend to overestimate a little bit to make sure that all the new property pays its fair share of the taxes. Last December, the CPI was 2.1%. So for this year, the CPI is going to be 2.1%, and then in the prior year, it was also 2.1%. So we've had the same CPI for the last 2 years. Existing equalized property value is expected to increase for 2018 by 1.7%, compared to last year at 3.2%. And then this is not a quadrennial reassessment year in Lake County. Once every 4 years, the county looks at all the properties and reassesses them. Because it's not a reassessment year, they basically just look at the last 3 years of sales data and apply an equalization factor to all the property. So properties tend to go up and down together. If you look at the assessor's website. The information is right out there. They looked at the 2015, 2016, and 2017 sales data. 258 sales in Shields Township in 15, 284 in 16, and 283 in 17. And the average assessment level was 32.82%, and it's supposed to be 33.83. So they increase the property values by 1.7% to adjust it back up to the 33.33%, which is the statutory assessment level. New property is expected to be about $2.5 million for next year. This is made up primarily of, as we said, it's residential property in Lake Bluff, so it was 20 residential pins and the new Chase Bank on Rockland Road. And then historically, this is in line, maybe a little bit lower than average for the last several years. If you look at our long-term projections, this is, we're in 18-19 right here, and we're expecting to end the year at $6.7 million of fund balance. We're projecting out, assuming 2% CPI and $3 million of new property per year, with modest salary and benefit increases, a pretty much flat or balanced budgets going forward, flat fund balance. This, although we have not done a detailed capital plan yet, we did have a facility assessment that identified about $3 million of capital needs for the district, excluding technology and furniture. And so this projection includes $300,000 a year of capital expenditures. So all in, we expect to need to continue to levy at the CPI in order to hold ground with our fund balance and to have balanced budgets going forward. And that is the recommendation for this year, is to ask for a CPI increase to keep our fund balance in the desired range and to grow revenue in pace with inflation. We do have some uncertainty around some legal settlements the district's involved with, and we're also negotiating our teachers' contracts, so there's some fairly significant uncertainty in the future. This addresses will address our facility needs and preserve the PTEL base and allow us to levy for future years what is needed. And we still have until April 2019 if we wanted to adjust our debt extension. So the levy recommendation, if you do the CPI calculation, it works out to $15.3 million of operating tax extension on existing properties, an additional $56,000 contribution from new property, another $34,000, which is just kind of pad to make sure that I don't levy enough, and then some rounding, and then so for a total of $15.45 million, which is a total increase of 2.7% versus the prior year. You can see 2.1%, that's the CPI, that's on existing property, and then the balance is new property, coming from new property. Our operating tax rate is going up slightly, and that's because our CPI is higher than our increase in property value, and those things work together. So if the property value increase was higher than CPI, then our tax rate would go down. But our tax rate is holding fairly steady at $2.26 per $100 of value. Our debt service extension, as I said, it's about 1% more than last year, $2.2 million, for a total tax extension estimate of $17.6 million, or $2.55 per $100 of property value. And that's it. So, questions?
Just for the massive viewing audience, could you explain, I thought I guess we didn't have a slide on it, but the difference between our levy amount and the total amount of revenue that the district gets. You know, like if you had a pie chart that shows the percentage of our revenue that comes from taxes versus the other, just want to make it clear that this is not, that most of our revenue is from taxes, from property taxes.
I think
a huge portion of it.
Page, it was in there.
It was in there, okay.
So
That was in there.
there it is. So 91% of our
So that's revenue. Okay, good.
comes from local property taxes, 9% from other sources, State revenue is 3%, federal is very small,
So
comes from
everything
grants.
other than property is a very small piece.
Right.
And part of the reason of that is because we're a very property-rich town, right? I mean, we're,
Right, the state funds, and well, actually, this is our next topic, to go through state funding, and the state looks at your local property wealth.
Yep.
And it says you need to, we think it costs X to fund education appropriately, and we're going to look at how much you can contribute, and then we're going to make up the difference. And so there's very little difference to make up for us because we have a great property wealth here.
Indeed, there's no difference. This is just the base level funding that
exactly.
we continue to get, because we're actually 137% of the.
Of adequacy, correct.
Adequacy.
Which is a great lead-in into the
Wow.
next presentation.
so, item B, Kevin and Dr. Rubenstein and Mr. Khan will present a presentation on evidence-based funding.
That's exactly it.
Not yet.
Yeah, not you yet.
Oh, I got excited.
Yeah, you did get excited, yeah. Yeah, Kelly is super excited to talk about evidence-based funding. She will be able to do that soon. So that is a great lead-in. I know that we've been alluding to this presentation for a while. So the school funding formula was overhauled last year, actually on August 31st. The governor signed it into law, and we've been working over the last year as a state to really implement that. And so the old school funding formula was basically based on the number of students in the district, and so you can sort of see based on that illustration why that wouldn't work. There were a number of people who talked about having equal school funding, and so everybody just gets the same amount of money, and so you can see sort of why that wouldn't work. And all of our professional associations and a number of other governmental organizations were pushing this equitable and adequate funding, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, which is actually what was signed into law. And it's really focused on evidence-based funding based on the students that you actually have in your district. So in essence, the more difficult that a student is to educate, the more money you're going to get to educate them. And so a little bit about the formula and how it works. Every district gets an adequacy target. So you'll see here in just a second about how much the adequacy target is, exactly how much does it cost to provide a high-quality education. And the state and Lake Bluff would probably differ. I know that they would differ when it comes to the definition of high quality, but it's really adequate is what we're looking at. Then we look at the percent of adequacy. So how well-funded is that school district? And so we look at the local capacity, and what goes into that local capacity is the local tax dollars, the CPP-RT, Jay's favorite acronym, and then our base funding minimum. And so that base funding minimum is the old general state aid, along with a number of state categorical grants, primarily special education and EL funding, English language learner funding, that we used to get. And it's multiplied based on the area of the state that you're in. So we get a little bit of a multiplier because we're in Lake County and we would pay higher salaries here. And DuPage County has a similar multiplier. If you're in a downstate county like Macoupin County, for example, they are actually divided. So they get a little bit of it's a decimal that they multiply it by. And then the final thing here is that the state actually figures out your gap to adequacy. And you'll see here in just a second that that there isn't a gap to adequacy in Lake Bluff. And so we're actually over adequacy. So the final piece here is that there's this distribution formula. So how is new money from the state distributed? That's the basic mechanics of how the evidence-based funding model works. It's like that we took a long time to get there and to really explain that to people, but that is really the base, of how it works. So in order to determine the adequacy targets, first you take the cost of the 27 essential elements, and those are actually all outlined in the state law. Some of them are listed up there. The second part here is that you actually then apply the essential elements to the individual districts based on the demographics. So you take your enrollment. If you have a large student enrollment, if you have a lot of English language learners, students with special needs, students coming from low income backgrounds, you're going to apply that into the cost of the essential elements there. Step 3 here is that you are going to adjust based on the regional elements, and then the last part here is that you're going to get the district adequacy target. So this base funding minimum is what I just generally talked about. So every district keeps their amount of state funding it received in FY17. That was a big part of this, is that we heard a lot about this, is that there couldn't be any losers in this, and that no district would see any red numbers. And so that was a big part of the guarantee in this, is that everybody was guaranteed their base funding minimum, and so that's what's included in the base funding minimum. Going forward, no district receives less state funding than it received in the prior year, and every new dollar a district received from the state in year 1 becomes a part of that base funding minimum in year 2. So for example, you'll see in just a second that we received about $1,200 new dollars this last year, so that becomes a part of our base funding minimum. But those other districts like North Chicago that received over $1 million new dollars in their base funding minimum, that becomes a part of their base funding minimum for the next year, and it keeps building until they're at adequacy.
That's a real example of the disparity between the two.
That is
I'm not saying it's not warranted, but that's pretty incredible.
That is a very real example of the disparity, and you'll see that actually at the end of the presentation. So there's one thing here that all of us continue to talk about. If the state does not appropriate enough dollars to cover the cost of the base funding minimum, then funds are first removed from the base funding minimum of the most adequately funded districts like ours. So the base funding minimum gets taken away from us first, and that there are districts that are all over the state that are using general state aid and the ELL state grant and the funding for children requiring special ed just to pay payroll. And that was a very real thing, and we don't compare in any way to that. So Jade's going to talk now about really what our core investments look like and how we compare.
Planning to not fund is what that.
Right. So
They're planning to
work their way around to taking away that 3%,
Yeah.
which we sort of figured would probably happen
Right.
at some point.
But we still have the same mandates. I just want to point that out.
And they increase every year.
Well, that's if
Lots of
there's,
supervision and direction.
that's if there's no new money, and so, the goal is to continue to fund with new money.
Yeah, just
On your
3%.
presentations that you had here, there were a couple rows hidden, and so these numbers might look a little different, but for, what they do is they start with the premise that for low-income students, it's more rigorous, requires more attention to educate, so that the class sizes for low-income students are lower than the class sizes for non-low-income students. And so the recommended class sizes, and this is all research-based that they used in the formula, are for an adequate education. For K3 is 15-to-1 for low-income and 20-to-1 for non-low. And then at the 4 through 8 grade levels, it's 20-to-1 for low-income and 25-to-1 for non-low-income. So for our district, if you plug in all of our numbers and do the ratios, it would come out to 39.5 FTE of regular ed classroom teachers. And this is for core subjects, math, ELA, social studies, science, and world language only. And
So what the state is saying is adequate is 39.5 for
Right.
our
For our
demographic.
For our demographics,
Right,
exactly.
and what we actually have is 45.3.
45.3,
Okay.
correct. So we have 5.8 FTE above what is adequate according to the state.
But that's what the state is calling adequate.
And
right?
we,
Gotta
so,
remember
you know, that's a dollar difference of $744,000. Then they take specialist teachers, which encompass drama, art, music, PE, health, STEAM, all the things that make Lake Bluff, you know, great, provide additional enrichment for our students that are valued, I mean, that Mark was talking about at the beginning of the session, and they take 20% of your core teachers, and that's how they calculate what your specialists should be. And so they're saying 8 FTE, we have 13 in our district, a difference of 5, or about $500,000. And then you kind of go down from there. The differences get a little bit smaller, but, you know, instructional facilitators are at 200 students per one facilitator, core intervention teachers, 450 students per intervention teacher. Substitutes, our substitutes are actually, we need subs for about 5.6% of days for sick and personal days, but that excludes leaves of absence. So it excludes professional development. So we have a lot of subs for those two areas that are above and beyond.
What's a facilitator?
I was just going to ask that. The instructional
The instructional
facilitator?
facilitator is like a coach, so actually somebody who comes into the classroom and gives active feedback to our teachers about how they can improve their instruction, not an administrator.
So like a Buffy Stauffer who does language arts. Jackie Tivador does math.
So they're measured as facilitators, not teachers on this?
That's exactly it.
Right.
Yep.
They don't provide direct instruction, but they provide help and enrichment.
Support.
And help in differentiation of instruction.
So I noticed that here it says 4.3 EBF FTEs, and ours is 4.2, so relatively similar, obviously, but our expenditures are nonetheless almost 3 times that of the EBF.
Yep.
It's because our
It's based
salaries?
on salary, yeah. Average salary used in the calculation is, I think, $64,000. And then, you know, for these smaller, you know, our average salary is a little bit higher than that, but then depending on who's teaching what, it might skew the numbers a little bit.
Yeah,
So remember before when I said that they take the multiplier?
yeah,
So it's the multiplier of the average salary of every instructional facilitator in the state. So they took the average salary of all the instructional facilitators that they have and all of the core teachers that they have, and they came up with an average salary, and now that's what we're basing our data on.
yeah.
And
But
it's
we got a
raised-
multiplier, but the multiplier must not come anywhere close to making up for what the actual difference is.
Correct.
It doesn't cover it,
In our
but then,
district,
you know, and also it just depends on, if you looked at our whole district, we'd be a lot closer. If you look at small positions with small numbers of people in them, where they are in the schedule could skew the individual numbers, but on the whole, we're fairly close.
I jumped down, I'm sorry, I jumped down. When I said 3 times as much, I was on the wrong line.
Yeah, we
It's
shouldn't
actually
be.
not 3 times as much, it was 100 grand
It's
more.
a little bit more.
It's 100 grand more, yeah.
And so then we also have per student investment, so this is on top of all our teaching staff, so money per student for gifted instruction, professional development, instructional materials, assessments, things of that nature. And you can see how we fall out there. Some numbers, and this will be more clear on the next chart, but central office and maintenance and operations are on a per student basis, and those tend to be, this is based, again, on a calculation of an average district. Because we're a very small district, we don't have a lot of students to spread out our central office costs. Centralized costs are going to look higher than the formula would predict for a small district like ours. And then employee benefits are supposed to be 30% of salaries, and actually ours are in line with that 30% number, but because we have higher FTE and higher salaries, our benefits are higher as well. And then I also have low-income investments and special education investment. What Kevin didn't mention is that what's been left out of this adequacy formula are things that the state did not cover before. And that's, so some significant examples of that are very high cost, high need students, because they were paid for outside of the formula. And we have expended a lot of effort to try to bring those students back into our school. And so we're spending appropriately to educate those kids within within our walls, and that's not reflected in the formula, so we have a high variance to formula.
Can you tell either some examples or explain what they are for low-income investments and English learner investments?
Yep. So like,
Staff or equipment or?
yep, like a low-income investment would be an additional teacher to make sure that students come to school on time, and that they are, that we're lowering class sizes and those sorts of things. So when you look at the low-income investments, actually in the formula, you are actually looking at having more school counselors, lower class sizes, those sorts of things, and it's distributed all throughout the formula.
Okay. So primarily a staff expense, but that could be distributed across social worker, counselor, teacher, trying to provide smaller class sizes for.
Yeah, it's actually, extra support.
Because it looks like we're underspending, so I was just trying to get a fix on what that was.
Right. And I think it's also hard to
Yeah.
categorize, so we have, I think you asked about, in the prior slide, our facilitators, they do lots of things, and they're also facilitating and providing support to low-income kids. So it's hard to classify somebody as doing only one thing, like I'm sure some of the special education supports that we have also support our low-income kids. So we don't have somebody assigned to, you're just a low-income person, where they would be, come out in this cell, but we have staff that do these things, and it's just not reflected in the numbers.
Another way of looking at it is our core teachers were above the EBF fairly significantly, and that
They
For our
provide those
income.
functions.
Providing
So
those
they
support,
provide
yeah,
those
right.
functions to,
That's a good point.
Right,
And
because
so-
we're meeting those
Broadly.
targets for the smaller class sizes for all the students.
whether
Not just the
low income
lower
or
income,
not,
yeah.
right.
That's a
You're
good point.
you're right, it does look kind of funny, but not everything kind of fits
The
perfectly
formula,
into
right.
the
Because I
definition.
think, to add on to that, because I think if people who aren't paying attention to this presentation or haven't had time to ask you guys a lot of questions will jump on those variances.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we need to have
It's
those
very easy
stored.
to do, yes.
And so this is just graphically kind of the biggest contributions to the difference between what we're actually spending and what the formula calculates as adequate. And you can see the biggest one is the special education investment. And I would say that spending this $1 million here within, within our walls is providing students with the least restrictive environment, but it's also preventing us from outsourcing these students to other higher cost outsourced placements.
It's a win-win,
Right.
because the kids get to stay in our district, and we save money from the outplacements.
And what you're saying is in the EBF, the 650 that's here would not include outplacement? The 650 that's in the
So,
EBF
yeah.
for special ed?
So really what is happening is that, say there are students in our district who have a one-to-one aide and, have a specialized nurse, that sort of thing. It's costing the district, I'm going to say, $85,000 to educate their kid. When it costs the district, on average, to educate a student, $18,000 to educate students.
Yeah.
So if I placed them out, I could actually get reimbursement for it.
Outside of the formula.
Outside of the district, outside of the formula. But that's not in the least restrictive environment.
I see.
And so if we sort of broke the law in order to save money and go against what's good for kids, then
I see.
we
We'd get
could,
rewarded.
have some additional money there. But one of the things that all of our professional organizations continue to work for is this idea that those sorts of kids, we need to have a separate sort of funding account available for them and for districts like ours who are impacted by kids like that, that are consistently in our districts, that are way exceeding our per capita.
So, but is this saying that, comparing apples to apples, that 650 is what would be expected for us to educate those kids, and we're paying 1.7? Yeah. I mean, the same number of children, like, per
So
capita?
that 650 is based on the fact that it's one staff member for every 141 general education students total. And so 900 divided by 141, and you get, you know,
Yeah.
that many staff members, and that's how many, that's what it
The
calculates out
650
to.
is,
Okay, so.
It's not looking at the number of actual special ed or IEPs or anything that a
Not at all.
particular district has?
Not at
Okay.
all. Because, and there were serious discussions about that.
Yeah.
Because we didn't want to reward districts for over-identifying.
Yeah,
Or
right,
penalize districts
right.
for under-identifying.
Well, and our district kind of statistically over-identifies, right?
We had
Aren't
in
we
the
high?
past, we are actually about, just a little bit below the state average right now.
Okay. Just interesting for,
Yep,
at those statistics.
yes.
And so,
Bless you.
again, this is just all those numbers that you were looking at, but graphically, so you can see the biggest drivers of the difference. Special ed, central office, again, because we're so small, the employee benefit number, and then the core teachers and specialist teachers. And then, beyond that, it starts to get a little bit less significant. And something that's also not in here is transportation, because the state didn't fund transportation through general state aid before. It's not at all in this formula anywhere. And that's an additional cost that the district has beyond this. So this, again, this is a summary by additional investments, other variables, and total per student. The district spends $15 million versus a state adequacy target of $9.8 million, and then with a difference of $5.1 million. If you compare us to our neighboring districts, we're not out of line. If you looked across the state, we are in the top 5% of districts in terms of our total adequacy target or revenue versus our adequacy target, but relative to our local peers, we're in line. And this is, you're able to, the way the formula works, it normalizes you based on high school, elementary, middle, so you can compare against all different kinds of districts. So these numbers are comparable. So you can see where we are relative to our neighbors.
So then, after everybody determines adequacy, then all of that money is distributed through the new tiers. So there were $350 million new dollars distributed in FY18. There are $350 million new dollars being distributed this school year. So that's what that looks like. And so that percentage of new funding sort of goes like this. If you're a tier 1 school, and that means that your percent of adequacy is below 66%, and the lowest funded school was, their percent of adequacy was at 49%. And so basically 49 to 66%, you're going to see about 50% of the new funding that's coming through. And so that's about 307 of the school districts across the state. Then tier 2 school districts are 66 to 90, and you're going to see about 49% of the new funding coming through, and that's about 348 of the school districts across the state. There were 58 tier 3 school districts. They get 0.9% of the new funding available. And then if you are above 100%, then, which is 140 districts, then you get 0.1% of the new funding that's available. And so about $350,000 distributed.
Divided by 140.
Right, distributed amongst those 140
20,000.
districts, exactly.
20,000.
So,
It didn't go down, though.
exactly. And so,
Yeah.
it really,
Probably.
again, I will say, so for us, $1,200 doesn't make a difference. For a colleague of mine in Belleville, Illinois, they saw $2.2 million in April, and then they got another $1.9 million. They're getting $1.9 million this year. So you can imagine the difference,
Huge difference.
that is making in their district over a really, really short period of time. I mean, they are doing things in their district that they have never been able to do before. This is a game changer across the state for kids where they have never been able to do this. So you can move it forward. After determining adequacy, we do that. And then just some other points to consider. There are some, we're a Tier 4 district. The state's distributed about $750 million new dollars in the last 6 months. There's a new reality that we're facing, this thing called an adequacy referendum. Since we are funded at over 110%, one of the compromises that was put in at the very last minute was that districts that are over 110%, if a group of citizens gets together and signs a petition, they can put a referendum on the ballot to lower the tax levy by up to 10%.
That's all voters.
And that's all, and so they can do that once every, I think it's once every 5 years that they can do that, and it can never fall below 110%, is the rule in the law. So you can see how that would impact us. And then there are ongoing negotiations to update the formula and add or change variables. So one of the latest things that they're talking about, we've already talked about the special education pieces, and we're always talking about that, but there are some people who are talking about additional poverty variables and additional variables based on race that could possibly be tied into that, and they're kind of arguing about that. And new money and shifts in demographics across the state will affect adequacy of every school district in the state. So it doesn't seem like it or look like it, but so our adequacy target actually went down this year. So we were at 143% this year, and we're actually at 137% this year. And other districts in the area like Deerfield went up. And it's just because of the fact that our population diversified with the rest of the state and theirs did not. It's like those sorts of subtle shifts. Jay said this before, but it is really important that everybody has new funding every year, because as there are fewer and fewer Tier 1 districts and fewer Tier 2 districts, then the way that this is supposed to work is that it's supposed to eventually relieve property tax burden across the state, and eventually that will reach all parts of the state. It will take a long time. You know, the full implementation is like a 15-year implementation, but it's supposed to relieve property tax burden across the state. And so it's important to have new funding every year from the state level, because that will, when you have more money coming from the state, like in Jay's pie earlier, then that will allow us to have less money coming from local property taxes.
And just for point of reference, before this bill, Illinois was number 50 out of 50 states for the amount of funding that came from the state versus local revenue sources.
Exactly it.
And one of the reasons we see such wide divergence in the quality of education in Illinois is that very point. It varies significantly based on where you're from. Now I think you and I talked about this, we're moving a little bit toward the middle. We're still on the high end.
That's the goal.
And we ultimately need to move to more state funding and less property tax funding.
That is the
So that's the answer. We're getting there. We'll get there. Give us another 50 years.
It's a long-term goal. Nobody's
But at least
asking to
it's
do it
headed in
over
the right
1 year.
direction for the
That's
first time.
exactly it.
Yeah.
Is there any conversation about the state trying to impact the way our budget is allocated, where we see some variances there, like what we were talking about earlier, that they would try and have some impact on that?
Tell me more about.
Well, okay, we think you're spending, 50% less than you should on low-income investments.
Yes, yeah.
So because you are, we're going to take away the last of your 3%, or we're going to do some other thing to you.
Yep. So actually, that is a perfect segue into the next presentation, for real, honestly, because because the accountability for this is actually the statewide ESSA plan. And that is to say that if you are, if what they said to all of us as we were working on these bills, if you're a superintendent and you are tier 2 and you're getting $5 million new dollars and we are not seeing student performance improvements, we're going to be having a conversation about that, an honest conversation. And the honest conversation is, why is it that your class sizes have not been decreasing? Why is it that you have not been doing X, Y, and Z? And so there were some pretty clear expectations that you're not giving it all to staff and raises, you're not doing, a major renovation, you're not doing those sorts of things. It was pretty clear that you put this towards improving staff climate, that you put it towards lowering class size so that you can actually improve outcomes of kids, that you can do all of these other sorts of things that are going to help to improve student learning. So,
and I get that if your district is getting, a new $1 million, I could see the oversight piece and coming back to ask questions about it. In a district like ours, where, okay, we get a few dollars right now, I sort of looking at this, I'm assuming that'll go away.
I don't see
Theoretically,
them.
it's supposed to get bigger.
yeah.
They hold you accountable for results. They don't tell you how to spend your money, as long as you're getting the results.
So there's not my basic question, there's not a report where we're showing we have a lower investment in low income, for example.
There is a report. We have done the report. We've submitted the report to the state about how we are spending that money. And we are what we're talking about in that report, and we can show it to you, is that we are working on improving student achievement of all students.
Right.
All
based on our
subgroups.
strategic plan and based on the subgroups. So.
Seems like the bigger challenge is going to be potential referendums.
And
That's
there
where
are
the
school
control-
districts in the area. The first time that it's available is the April 2019. And so there are school districts in the area that are
I
facing
had
that.
missed that little modification.
Facing that already?
Yeah.
I had missed.
But I would also share that the other discussion with that is, I think it was the beginning of this year, when you get your driver's license, they automatically get you registered to vote.
Yep.
So the number of voters, when they talk about that percentage, the number of voters is going to be increasing everywhere in the state of Illinois.
You have to,
So-
the petition has to include 10% of the registered voters.
Petition to get it on a referendum. Oh,
And
I see.
then the number then is going to be bigger because we're going to have more voters in each community.
Is there, will there be, and I'm sorry, I didn't ask this in advance, it just occurred to me as you're elaborating on some of these slides, a relationship between adequacy and performance and test scores that can be documented, or will that come as ESSA rolls out over time?
So on the school report cards that are coming next week, right next to our designation, our school designation, it says right next to it how much we're spending per student and the percentage of adequacy. And it says that, and you can click a button that says compare this to other schools in the area and in the state and all of that other stuff. Very easy to do.
I'm thinking of the potential referendum, and I would like to be able to demonstrate that we are clearly outperforming districts at 100% of adequacy.
Right.
Because you get something for that buck.
All right, that's exactly it. We have, this is something that we have all been working on really since January, I would say, is that sort of thought process about how do we talk with people about what they're getting from Lake Bluff schools, and about why we're over adequacy and what really is the value of a Lake Bluff education. And so we have really been talking about that.
We've been putting a lot of our time and focus on that
I
story.
think that's going to be a good question. That's going to be a question that's going to come up. And looking at lists of the compiling a list of all the schools either in the state or regionally that are at adequacy and analyzing them and comparing them to.
It's right in the presentation,
Well,
so
yeah,
we've already got them
Yeah,
listed.
but just a little bit.
Yep,
But it would be,
And what the results are.
yep, and what the results are.
So then that's all we have to do is add the results to and we've got it. And we have a good story, so,
All right.
which leads right into the last presentation for this evening.
Item C, student growth.
Kelly, you may want to go up right now.
All right, so during the last month, we talked about the local assessments and how we measure that, and so this month, we are going to talk about some of the external assessments. So you've got all of the strategic plan indicators, there are lots of them, and the way that we drafted this strategic plan is really to talk about growth and achievement, and some of our subgroups that are both official, and then some of the other groups of students that we are watching inside the district. So this is new for you this year, something that is really new for all of us. In the past, our designations as a district have been 100% based on the proficiency of students on the PARCC assessment. So really how many students we could get over a certain bar. And so you would see at this presentation the percentage of students that got over the bar and on ELA and math.
It wasn't growth either, was it? It was over the bar of proficiency, not even growth.
That's exactly it.
Right.
You can see that that is now just 20% of our score. The largest percentage of our score is based on ELA growth and math growth. Another 5% is based on EL growth to proficiency, so how well we're supporting our English language learners. 20% of our score is based on the percentage of our students pre-K through 8th grade that are chronically absent from school. And then another 5% of our scores are based on the student portion of the Illinois 5 Essential Survey. And the important part to think about for all of these is that they are broken down into all of the subgroups and all of the demographics. So I'll use the Illinois 5 Essential Survey and chronic absenteeism. They look at our schools, that's the other big difference. They look at our schools individually, so they look at Lake Bluff Elementary School and how we're doing it as a whole school, but then they also look at, for example, students from low-income backgrounds on the 5 Essential Survey and what they have to say. And they look at students from low-income backgrounds and make sure that they are not more absent than the rest of the student population. And if they are, then we cannot score as high on these measures. So it's a pretty rigorous process, and something that we are all getting used to. So the biggest piece of the pie here is based on our growth, and we have a lot to celebrate here because our growth from year to year is really very, very strong. So the percentage of all students in the expected growth range or higher on the state assessment in ELA, you can see that it ranges from a low of 82% to a high of 99% in 5th grade. And so a really, really high percentage of our students are meeting those growth expectations, and that includes students in our subgroups. So students who are special education students, students from a low-income background, students who are English learners, and then when you look at LBES overall and LBMS overall, we're doing really well. This is 25% of our overall score. I will not bore you with the actually how they do this, but what they do here is that they actually take each of those indicator percentages and they convert it to a raw score of 100 for each of these things. And then that goes into the thing, and it's a really complicated formula.
And blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
you get a number.
It is like 26.22221 divided by 3.
Big giant black box.
Exactly. It really is crazy. And then as we look at at our math scores, again, a low of 67% in the percentage meeting expected growth in 8th grade to a high of 93% in 6th grade. I've seen, just by comparison, some other school districts who've been able to quietly share their scores. I can tell you that these are among the strongest in the area, and that these scores are really carrying us, and that this is the 50% is really what we are focusing on.
The growth is based on PARC scores, so.
Year to year.
Year to year, so, and this applied to high schools as well, right?
So high schools actually have a whole different pie.
Okay,
Yeah.
never mind then.
Yeah.
Because
They're different.
lots of people opted out of the high school, like.
Yeah.
Well, and you're bringing up a point that I wanted to bring up, that 8th grade score. We had a group of kids opt out in 8th grade.
Yeah,
And so,
Impacted a lot of our 8th grade
yeah,
scores.
so people ought to know by keeping their kids
Yeah.
out of the testing.
It impacts the district.
They're actually impacting their
yeah,
property value.
right.
Exactly.
And so what you don't, when you have a low score there, what you see up here is actually the percentage of students, all of these students took the test twice. So they took the test in 8th grade, for example, they took it in 7th grade and 8th grade, so they have 2 scores. If you didn't take the test in 8th grade, and we had a group of students who didn't take it in 8th grade, then we can't have a growth score for you. So if we were expecting really strong growth, and we should be expecting really strong growth because we had it in all of our other grades, then
It hurts us.
it hurts us by having people opt out. And so, but still, the LBMS and LBES overall were really strong. So that's 50% of our overall score, and we did really well.
Can I
So-
make a recommendation, though?
Yep.
Based on that point precisely, when we have tests coming up, we maybe should have a paper published that we send along to.
We've
to
been doing that.
families that indicates what this is affecting the community.
Yes, it was just a theory until.
We actually sent things out last year. Kevin met with families last year. So
We can,
this year.
we can work on those.
We're going to even have stronger language and stronger documentation this year.
How it affects your community by not
Right.
taking these tests.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't want to put undue stress on these kids, but just opting out altogether, it doesn't even give us a chance.
Right, to have the strongest.
7% in the 8th grade, yeah.
Yes. So then, when we look at achievement, which is, again, we're going to look at ELA first, and this is 10% of our score. So achievement, still really strong. We have some lower classes that had their achievement levels at a lower level, but the achievement piece starts to become a smaller piece of our puzzle, where we really are focusing on the growth of students year to year, which is, in all of these educators' opinions, what we should have been focusing on this entire time, and what we've been trying to focus on the entire time, but we've never been rewarded for. So for LBES overall, the percentage of students who were at a level 4 or 5 on track for college and career readiness was about 63%, and LBMS overall was 81.3%. And then in math, so then just historical, this is how we compare. So we went up as a district overall slightly from year to year. Again, 10%
The
of the
light blue and
scores.
the dark blue are both PARC scores, right? Was
Yes.
the green PARC?
Yes, yes.
Green is
Green
also-
is 2016 scores.
Wow, I didn't realize we'd had it for 3 years.
Yeah, now
4
we're
years.
changing it again. 4 years, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yep, yep.
That's the longest we've had for a while.
Right. So then, when we look at math, again, we have some classes that we are still really working on, but the percentage who are on track for college and career readiness, and the district and schools overall are doing really well. And when you look at the year to year, and I updated this, so it's a little bit different than probably what's in your board packets. When you look at this year to year, we are exactly the same as where we were a year ago. So our students are achieving, the same percentage of students are achieving as did last year. So another 10% of our score. So Kelly is going to talk then about one of our strategic plan indicators is the percentage of all students at the highest level on that state assessment, and this is something that we had talked about during strategic planning.
So this next data set, well, it's not part of that SFI, is one that we wanted to bring your attention to tonight. So students that are scoring at a level 5 on the Park assessment, we broke that information down so that you could see by grade level the percentage of students that earned that highest level. And I think it's kind of scattered. You can see 7th grade is definitely an area for celebration. With 8th grade, we acknowledged that students opted out, and it's quite possible that those students that opted out are ones that may have helped to up or bump up that percentage at the 8th grade level. Overall, by building, 13% at the elementary and 28% at LBMS, bringing us to 21% across the district in ELA scoring at a level 5. In the area of math, you can see the numbers shake out just a little bit differently. So that 3rd grade tends to score a little bit lower percentage-wise in terms of achievement, but they definitely had some higher percentages as we look at the number of students that earned a 5 on the Park assessment. And then 5th and 7th grade sort of brought us up as well. So overall, we had more students earning a 5 in the area of ELA versus math. So we want to talk a little bit about what's being done. So as an administrative team, we've been having conversations since the end of last year, more intensely over the summer, and then throughout this current school year. So conversation happening at the administrative level, building level, and then grade team level. So we're kind of categorizing our strategies into 2 main areas: the consultant work that we have planned for the 18-19 school year, and then district efforts across the 18-19 school year. One of the big things that we think is important to point out, last year we had a staff developer come to us from the Teachers College in New York City to support us with implementation of our reading and writing workshop. So they have high demand across the country right now, so we were waitlisted for all grade levels, and there was an opening at grades 3 through 5. And I'd like to think that some of this work, we've agreed, really helped us with those growth scores at 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade levels. The timing of this consultant coming out allowed us to do some intensive work prior to Park testing. So this year we have these specialized coaches coming out to support teachers for kindergarten through 2nd grade, 3rd through 5th, and then also at the middle school level for 6th through 8th grade. So that's going to help us target some of the ELA work, which will help continue the growth, but then also increase our achievement. In the area of math, we've had a long-standing relationship with our consultant, Janice Heigl. So we've already initiated work sort of virtually, and she's going to be coming into both of our buildings again to continue to support teachers with math instruction. As far as district efforts go, we've done work already this year in the area of kindergarten through 8th grade articulation. So. We have created space for kindergarten through 8th grade teachers to come together and talk about instruction in their classroom. So we do a lot of work on a very consistent basis where all of the 4th grade teachers are coming together to have conversations, but now we're really making concerted effort for teachers to understand quite a bit more what's happening before students come into their grade level and then when they leave, so we can just continue to build that guaranteed and viable curriculum. We've done some work. We've got a team of teachers that are attending the Illinois Association for Gifted Children conference that's coming up in the beginning of February, so that we can continue to support sort of that indicator about students working at the highest level on Park. And the next layer then is with intervention programs and our MTSS work. So we have programs now to support our students who are at the most risk. So tools to bring in, teacher training, and then finally,
NTSS, what's that?
Sorry, MTSS, so the first bullet point here about multi-tiered systems of support. We just want to guarantee that we are delivering high-quality instruction to all students at all levels. There are various levels of support depending on student need. And we had a team work throughout last year to really tighten that up and have communication throughout the district and throughout grade levels so that teachers are aware of what students are working on when they are at risk, if they need to work with a specialist, and how we can seamlessly bring that instruction back into the classroom. All right, going to pass it back over to Kevin.
So while it's not included this year, one of the additional measures that's included is the Illinois Science Assessment. And so in 2018-19, it's a strategic plan indicator. It's going to become an ESSA indicator at 5% of our score beginning in 1920. And so actually the achievement portion, that 20%, is actually going to go to less. So that'll fall slightly. And so the percentage of students meeting proficiency in 5th grade was actually 80% and 93% in 8th grade. And I would have the bars about how we compared year over year, but we don't have, this isn't a cohort group at all, so it wouldn't be fair to make comparisons. So 5th grade, it's just, this is the first time this group of 5th graders and this group of 8th graders has ever taken the assessment. So you'll see next month about how we compared overall. And then EL growth to proficiency and access, just our average composite scores. So it is the highest score that you can get here is a 5.0, and you need to have a composite score of 4.8 or higher in order to reach language proficiency. It sort of looks, if you look at this slide closely, like our scores went down at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but that's not really fair to say or accurate to say because there are only 9 students there were only 9 students at the middle school who took the access assessment, and so it's a smaller group. And so you would expect that their language skills and needs would be more intense in that smaller group, and that they would likely be more intensive ELLs. And so you can see where we grow there. I wish that I could tell you how they're going to compute our EL growth to proficiency, but they haven't told us that yet. And then chronic absenteeism is another 20%, and we did really well here. So we had 4% of our students at LBES who were chronically absent, another 6% at LBMS who were chronically absent. And it's important to remember that students who have missed 10% or more of school days, excused or unexcused. And so we sent out attendance letters for last year. Early on in the school year this year, and we got some pushback about like, why are we sending these? And you know, shouldn't you count half days as a full day and all of this other stuff? And it's pretty clearly laid out. So I'm just putting that out there to all of you, that if you heard from anybody, that is pretty clearly laid out here about what that is and what counts as chronically absent. And you can see that it's different in terms of the points and the percentages for students from our subgroups. So that's all that we have for you right now. We will have comparisons for you to our other comparables next month.
Another way in which we can improve our property values, get our kids to school.
That's exactly it, yeah.
I have a really basic question, Kevin. I apologize if it's maybe it's not appropriate for this arena, but maybe it would be helpful to people listening. The differences, why the weighting differences between achievement and growth? Why do you think, what is the logic behind putting more emphasis on growth than achievement?
So I will use our neighbors to the north in North Chicago. They are going to have a really, really hard time getting a large group of students to a certain percentage of scores. So if we set a proficiency bar at 80% and said North Chicago meet it, and counted that as 50% of everybody's score, they would never meet the bar. And we would consistently meet it. And that's not really right or fair.
More about meeting kids where they are, right?
And but in all districts across the state, we should consistently be expecting teachers to take a student and produce, at the very least, a year's worth of growth in a year's worth of time, and hopefully much more. And based on the evidence, our teachers, in many cases, produce more than a year's worth of growth in a year's worth of time, and that's really something to be celebrated. And that's why we weighted it more. That's why the state weighted it more, because that's what they were trying to do there.
Okay, thanks. Very good.
I appreciate all the work that was put in all these presentations, because it's all brand new, and it was a lot of work, and it's a lot of valuable information
Yeah.
It's great.
for the board to digest.
A lot to digest. But you guys came well prepared, so thank you, appreciate that. Item D, revised 1819 board meeting calendar. Dr. Sophie.
This is very easy. As Jay said, we have to have 20 days between approval of the tentative levy and approval of the regular levy, and when we counted out from the end of November's meeting, we didn't have 20 days. So we propose flipping and having the regular board meeting on November 13th, and the committee of the whole meeting be at the end of the month. We could have that be just a closed session if we need to for negotiations or any other legal work. Right now, we're just going to wait and see where we are for that end of the November meeting. The one thing, though, and this is my fault, we need to bring this for approval, Shelley, at the next meeting, because the board needs to approve it. So we just have to remember to bring it to
Be a
them.
regular meeting.
And it will be a regular meeting, so we'll approve it there. And that's that.
That's easy, okay. Action items, not too many. So we're going to start with resolution appointing a NIHIP, which is our insurance cooperative, correct? A NIHIP representative and alternative representative from the district. Would Jean or Jay like to explain that just a little bit so people know what we're talking about?
At NIHIP meetings, there's business conducted and we vote on various items, and they just want to make sure that the person who's representing the district is authorized to bind the district in those meetings.
And who are we proposing to be those representatives?
I would be the representative and Dr. Sophie would be the alternate.
Okay. Any questions for her?
I really hope you're able to make all the meetings.
All right, so may I have a motion to approve the resolution appointing NIHIP representative and alternative representative as presented in your board documents?
So moved.
Second.
I don't think that's I can just do all in favor, right?
That's an all in favor.
All in favor?
Yo.
Opposed? Motion is approved. Item B is the approval of a truth and taxation hearing for December 11th, 6:45 PM. The process of setting the levy is completed annually and must be approved by a school board prior to the last Tuesday of December. Jay talked about this earlier, that we need to have that hearing. And it's not required, but it's best practice, right? Anybody have any questions?
And this is a voice call also.
No. May I have a motion to approve the truth and taxation hearing for December 11th at 6:45 PM?
So moved.
Second, anybody?
I'll second.
All in favor? Nobody's in favor?
Yes, I'm in favor.
All in favor? Aye.
Yes. It's time to go.
Opposed? Okay, it's
Going
approved.
into hour 3 and a.
Yeah, it's a long night.
We're into hour.
Personnel report, this month's personnel report, it includes just one item. It's a Jeremy Celerek?
Jeremy Corona.
Jeremy,
That's our new name.
okay. PE teacher is retiring from the elementary school effective June of 2023.
Correct.
So the beginning of the retirement track. So any questions on that? Concerns, comments? May I have a motion to approve the personnel report for October 23rd, 2018?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Richard Haig.
Yes.
Susan Ryder.
Yes.
Mark Barry.
Yes.
Leanne Sherlow, yes.
The motion is approved. Item D, the last action item, is our consent agenda. And in this month, the consent agenda includes the open session meeting minutes from the September 18th, 2018 regular Board of Education meeting, the closed session meeting minutes from the October 9th, 2018 Committee of the Whole meeting, our treasurer's report, our impressed report, our bills report, and our P-card report. Would anybody like any of that pulled from the consent agenda to be discussed separately? No? May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda for October 23rd, 2018?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Richard Haig.
Yes.
Susan Ryder.
Yes.
Mark Barry.
Yes.
Leanne Sherlow, yes.
Motion is approved. That's it for, God, I'm so tired right now. Our action items. And we don't have any FOIA requests. Is there any other public comment? Anybody like to address the board? May I have a motion to adjourn at 8:53?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
My tongue was tied for